You sit in a room full of people, yet somehow you feel like the only person who exists inside your own silence. The conversations continue around you. Laughter fills the air, phones light up with messages, plans are being made, and everyone else seems to belong somewhere. But when you walk back to your car, drive home, unlock the front door, and step into another quiet evening, the same question returns. Why does it always feel like this? Why do the years keep passing while the loneliness stays? You have tried to explain it before, but the words never seem strong enough. It is not simply that you are alone. It is that you often feel unseen, misunderstood, different in ways you cannot fully describe. You have prayed about it more times than you can count. Sometimes those prayers were spoken out loud. Other times they were whispered through tears that no one else ever witnessed. There were nights when you asked God if he had forgotten you, only to feel as though heaven answered with silence. You watched other people build friendships that seemed effortless. You watched families laugh together while yours felt distant. You celebrated weddings, birthdays, promotions, and milestones for others, while quietly wondering when your own season would change. After a while, you stopped talking about it because you became tired of hearing easy answers to a difficult pain. People told you to stay positive. They reminded you that everyone feels lonely sometimes. They encouraged you to be patient. While those words may have been sincere, they never seemed to touch the deeper ache inside your heart, because what you were carrying was not simply loneliness. It was the fear that perhaps you would always feel this way. There is something especially painful about enduring a struggle that nobody else seems able to see. Physical wounds receive sympathy. Emotional wounds often remain invisible. Spiritual weariness can become even harder to explain. You wake up, go to work, smile when necessary, answer messages, fulfill responsibilities, and appear completely fine. Yet underneath everything, another conversation continues. You wonder if something is wrong with you. You wonder whether you somehow missed the life everyone else was invited into. You begin comparing yourself without realizing it. You notice how easily other people connect, while every relationship you build seems to require extraordinary effort. Slowly, loneliness begins changing from something you experience into something you believe about yourself. You stop saying, "I feel alone." Instead, somewhere deep inside, you begin believing, "I am alone." That difference changes everything. If any part of this reflects your own journey, let me know in the comments. Sometimes simply discovering that someone else understands can lift a burden that has been carried in silence for far too long. Throughout Scripture, we meet people who experience long seasons of waiting, uncertainty, and isolation. Their stories are not identical to yours, and they should not be treated as formulas that predict what will happen next. Yet they remind us of something deeply important. A season of loneliness is not necessarily evidence that God has abandoned someone. There are faithful people throughout the biblical story who spent long stretches walking through uncertainty, while continuing to trust that God remained present even when his purposes were not fully visible. That truth may not immediately remove your pain, but it can keep despair from having the final word. Perhaps one of the hardest parts of loneliness is that it changes how you see yourself. At first, you simply notice that invitations become less frequent. Then you notice that your phone stays quiet. Eventually, you stop expecting anyone to call. You tell yourself you are protecting your heart. But beneath that protection, something fragile is slowly forming. You begin expecting disappointment before it arrives. You hesitate to reach out because rejection has become familiar. You convince yourself that keeping your distance is easier than risking another wound. Little by little, isolation builds walls that were never intended to become permanent. Yet even within those walls, your heart still longs for connection. It still hopes. It still prays. It still wonders whether someone might truly know you without asking you to become someone else first. There is nothing weak about that longing. It reflects something woven into human nature. We were created for relationship with God and with one another. Feeling that need does not mean your faith is small. It means you are human. Faith does not erase the desire to be loved, understood, and welcomed. Instead, faith invites us to bring those desires honestly before God, rather than pretending they do not exist. Maybe you have wondered why your prayers seem unanswered. Maybe you have questioned whether God hears words spoken through exhausted hearts. Those questions are not unusual. Many faithful people have cried out with similar honesty. The Psalms are filled with voices that speak openly about fear, loneliness, waiting, and hope existing together. They remind us that bringing our pain to God is itself an act of trust. You do not have to hide your questions before Him. He already knows them. Nor do you have to pretend you are stronger than you are. Strength in Scripture is often found not in pretending everything is fine, but in continuing to seek God even when life feels uncertain. Perhaps that is where this journey begins to change, not because every answer suddenly appears, but because you slowly discover that your worth has never depended on the number of people who notice you. The silence around you cannot erase the value God has already given you. That does not instantly remove loneliness, and it does not make waiting easy. But it offers a foundation that circumstances cannot easily take away. There may still be difficult days ahead. There may still be evenings when the quiet feels heavy, yet there is also room for hope that does not depend on immediate change. Christian hope is not wishful thinking. It is the steady confidence that God remains faithful even when we cannot yet see the whole picture. You may not understand this season today. You may still wrestle with questions that have no quick answers, but your story is not finished, and neither is God's work within you. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins quietly, long before anyone else notices it, even before we notice it ourselves. And perhaps that is the invitation for today, not to deny your loneliness, not to pretend it does not hurt, but to believe that your pain does not define your identity. You are more than the silence you have endured. You are more than the relationships that never lasted. You are more than the disappointments you carry. The years may have been marked by loneliness, but they do not have to be the final chapter of your story. There comes a point when loneliness begins to change the way you interpret every part of your life. You no longer see it as one difficult season among many. Instead, it starts becoming the lens through which everything else is viewed. A delayed opportunity feels like another rejection. A cancelled plan feels like proof that nobody truly values your presence. A quiet weekend becomes another reminder that everyone else appears to have found the place where they belong, while you continue searching. This is one of the hidden burdens of prolonged loneliness. It does not simply affect your emotions. It quietly shapes your expectations. Eventually, you stop anticipating joy because disappointment has become more familiar. Yet this is precisely where hope must be protected. Scripture never ignores human suffering, but it repeatedly invites people to resist allowing suffering to become the final definition of who they are. Waiting can shape character without becoming your identity. Isolation can teach dependence on God without convincing you that you were made to live disconnected from others forever. Throughout history, countless believers have discovered that some of their deepest spiritual growth occurred during seasons they never would have chosen. Not because loneliness itself was good, but because God remained present within it. That distinction matters. The hardship was real, the tears were real, the unanswered questions were real. Yet God's faithfulness did not disappear simply because His presence felt less obvious. Think about the quiet moments that nobody else knows about. The drive home after another ordinary day, when you turned the radio off because even music could not distract you from your thoughts. The evenings when you looked at old photographs and wondered why life seemed simpler years ago. The mornings when you asked God for strength before anyone else was awake because you were already emotionally tired before the day had even begun. Those moments may feel insignificant to everyone else, but they matter. They reveal a heart that has continued reaching toward God even when certainty was difficult to find. Faith is often less dramatic than we imagine. Sometimes it is simply choosing to pray one more time when yesterday's prayer seemed unanswered. Sometimes it is opening Scripture again, even after reading it through tears. Sometimes it is deciding not to surrender to bitterness after another disappointment. Those decisions may appear small, yet over time they shape a person from the inside out. One of the greatest temptations during long seasons of loneliness is believing that your life has been placed on pause until circumstances improve. You begin telling yourself that you will truly live once the right friendship arrives, once the right relationship appears, once people finally understand you. While those desires are understandable, they can quietly rob the present of meaning. God often works within ordinary days that feel uneventful. Character grows gradually. Compassion deepens slowly. Patience develops through repeated opportunities to practice it rather than through instant answers. Looking back years later, many people recognize that God was shaping qualities within them that could not have been formed through comfort alone. That realization usually comes only in hindsight. During the journey itself, everything feels uncertain. Perhaps that is why trust is such a central theme throughout the Bible. Trust is rarely demanded when everything makes sense. It becomes meaningful precisely because there are moments when understanding is incomplete. If this part of the message reflects your own experience, share your story in the comments. Someone reading your words may realize they are not carrying this burden alone. Your honesty could become an unexpected encouragement for another person walking through a similar season. There is another truth worth considering. Loneliness often awakens compassion in people who have lived through it. Those who know what it feels like to be overlooked frequently become the first to notice someone standing alone. Those who have experienced rejection often learn how to welcome others with unusual kindness. This does not mean everyone who feels lonely will automatically become compassionate, nor does it suggest that suffering is required for maturity. Rather, it reminds us that God can redeem painful experiences by shaping hearts that reflect His love more deeply. The wounds may remain part of your story, but they do not have to become the source of resentment. They can become places where empathy grows. Perhaps one day you will recognize another person carrying the same quiet sadness you once believed nobody could understand. Perhaps your willingness to listen without offering easy answers will become the very comfort you once needed yourself. In that way, pain does not disappear, but it can be transformed into compassion that points beyond itself. This does not erase unanswered questions, and it certainly does not minimize the weight of long years spent feeling alone. Yet it reminds us that no season is completely without purpose, simply because we cannot immediately recognize what God is doing. Even when the path ahead remains unclear, the invitation remains the same. Continue walking faithfully. Continue bringing your honest heart before God. Continue believing that your value rests in His love, rather than in the changing opinions or attention of other people. There is still more to understand about this journey, because the deepest lesson is not found merely in surviving loneliness, but in discovering what kind of hope can remain when loneliness no longer has the final word. Perhaps the greatest surprise is not that the years of loneliness eventually end for some people, but that many discover something even more important along the way. They realize that the deepest change did not begin around them. It began within them. The person who once believed they were forgotten gradually learns that being unseen by people is not the same as being unseen by God. That realization rarely arrives in a single dramatic moment. More often it grows quietly, like the first light before sunrise. One ordinary morning you notice that your prayers sound different, not because every question has been answered, but because you are no longer praying only for an escape from your circumstances. You begin asking God to continue shaping your heart, to help you love without becoming bitter, to give you wisdom without making you proud, to keep you faithful even when the path remains uncertain. That kind of prayer reflects a heart that has been transformed by perseverance. It does not mean the pain has disappeared. It means the pain no longer has complete control over your identity. Looking back, you may remember countless moments when you assumed nothing meaningful was happening, days that felt repetitive, weeks that seemed empty, months when life appeared to stand still. Yet spiritual growth is often hidden while it is taking place. Just as roots develop beneath the surface, long before branches become visible, character is frequently being formed long before anyone, including ourselves, can recognize it. Scripture repeatedly points toward this quiet work of God, not as a guarantee that every earthly desire will be fulfilled exactly as we hope, but as an invitation to trust that He continues working even when we cannot measure His progress. That truth becomes especially precious during seasons when emotions suggest one story, while faith gently reminds us of another. Emotions may say, "You have been abandoned." Faith quietly answers that God remains near to those who call upon Him. Emotions may insist your life has less value because you spend so much of it alone. Faith reminds you that your worth was never established by popularity, admiration, or constant companionship. Emotions may whisper that your best years have already passed. Faith points toward the God who continually brings hope into places where human beings see only endings. This is why it is important not to build your identity upon the temporary conditions of your present season. Seasons change, circumstances change, relationships change. Even your own understanding grows over time. But God's character does not fluctuate with your emotions. His faithfulness is not measured by whether life unfolds according to your preferred timeline. There may still be prayers whose answers remain unknown. There may still be dreams that require patience. There may still be days when loneliness visits again. Yet none of those realities can separate you from the love that Scripture says God extends toward those who trust Him. Sometimes the greatest evidence of spiritual maturity is not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to let struggle extinguish hope. That hope is neither denial nor wishful thinking. It is the quiet confidence that even when you cannot trace every step of God's work, you can continue placing one faithful step in front of another. Consider how often Jesus Himself withdrew into quiet places to pray. Those moments of solitude were not signs of abandonment, but opportunities for communion with the Father. Your own solitude is not identical to His, and it should never be romanticized because loneliness can be deeply painful. Yet His example reminds us that silence is not always empty. Sometimes it becomes the place where weary hearts learn to rest in God's presence in ways that constant noise never allows. If today you still feel like the person who walks into crowded rooms carrying invisible burdens, know that your experience does not place you beyond the reach of God's compassion. If you still wonder why your journey has included so many lonely years, you are not required to pretend the question does not exist. Bring it honestly before God. Continue seeking Him with humility. Continue allowing His word to remind you of truths that feelings alone cannot sustain. And continue making room in your heart for hope, even if that hope feels small today. Throughout history, believers have testified not that life became free from hardship, but that God proved faithful within it. Their confidence grew not because every circumstance improved immediately, but because they gradually discovered that God's presence could sustain them through seasons they once believed would break them. Your story will not unfold exactly like anyone else's, and no one can promise how every chapter ahead will look. But you can hold firmly to the timeless promise that God does not abandon those who seek Him. His love is not earned through perfect faith, flawless obedience, or uninterrupted confidence. He meets imperfect people who continue turning toward Him, even with trembling hearts. So if you have spent years feeling alone, do not conclude that those years have erased your value. Do not assume that silence means God has stopped listening. Do not allow disappointment to convince you that hope has become unrealistic. Continue walking, continue praying, continue opening your heart to the God who knows every hidden tear, every silent prayer, every unanswered question, and every moment when you wondered if anyone truly understood. He sees what others overlook. He knows the parts of your story that have never been spoken aloud. Even when life feels unfinished, His faithfulness is not. Before you leave, I would love to hear from you. If this message resonated with your own journey, share a part of your story in the comments. Your words may encourage someone else who has quietly believed they were the only one carrying this kind of loneliness. And if today you are still in the middle of that difficult season, remember this simple truth. Your present chapter is not the whole story. Keep holding on to hope. Keep trusting God's character even when you cannot fully understand His timing. Keep believing that your life has meaning because it is held by the one whose love remains constant through every season. You are not defined by the years you felt alone. You are defined by the God who continues to walk with you, patiently, faithfully, and lovingly, every step of the way.